Hello and you're welcome to the Big Tech Show with me, Adrian Weckler. Now, restaurants are often regarded as a notoriously fickle type of business, but one Irish entrepreneur thinks he has cracked a way for them to make more money using AI, and he's just raised $16 million from one of Silicon Valley's biggest, most famous venture capital companies. Conor Sheridan, founder and CEO of Nori, also founder of the chicken fast food chain Mad Egg. How does Nori use AI?
Hey Adrian, thanks for having me on. Good question. So Nori itself is an operating system for restaurants. What that means is we house all of the mission critical workflows and data that you need to run a successful restaurant. So your revenue, your COGS, supply chain, people, all the way down to EBITDA. And that gives us a really unique use case to overlay or embed AI into our product. And what we do is analyze all of this data sets for each restaurant venue in a group or a brand, and suggest operational efficiencies and actions. So that could be predicting, for example, if you had a coffee shop, how many cups of coffee you're going to sell for every hour of every day, suggesting the optimal levels of staffing to be in the building to deliver those cups of coffee, to make sure that you're profitable enough and also guests get a good experience, or suggesting how much coffee needs to be produced, ordered, ground at any given time in a day. So what we're doing is basically like a little co-pilot in the background, analyzing complex sets of data and really just giving frontline teams simple bite-sized actions on how best to run their business. So each of those actions.
Like a co-pilot. Okay. Does it come with a Scarlett Johansson voice?
No. I should have chosen my words maybe a little bit more carefully there, considering what's in the news. But I think it's like I don't know if you want to use like an AI restaurant manager or something like that, right? Probably a little bit more.
Well, did you at least try to contact Scarlett Johansson to see if you could use her voice?
I don't think we have the budget for that at the moment, but
well,
no.
I'm diverting for a second here. What did you make of all of that?
It wasn't great. It wasn't a great look, but not too much into the detail of it, to be honest. Obviously,
you weren't consulted. But isn't it funny how Sam Altman and OpenAI, I'm on a tangent here, has kind of become a sort of a villain figure. He's kind of the new Mark Zuckerberg, who were the new Elon Musk. He's gone from being the visionary doer to still a visionary doer, but maybe someone who we don't like as much.
Yeah, there's always an arc for everyone, right? It'd be interesting to see what his arc plays out to be. But
I think it'll be very
anything
interesting.
that is anyone that's in the driver's seat of something that's so powerful, people always have some level of trepidation, I think, irrespective if it's him or anyone else.
We'll come back to your plans for Nori in a moment, but in general, as a rule, how much do you think AI can supplement or replace current existing functions or processes in restaurants? I mean, we've all seen the self-service kiosks in places like McDonald's, but what else can it do?
Yeah, really good question, right? So we've seen a lot of like guest-facing digitizations. You mentioned kiosks, like the QR codes that came around after the pandemic for ordering. Some of those are landed better than others. I think AI is slightly different than that. I think running a restaurant is just super complex, right? It's a lot of different data sets in the business. You have to have scale to be successful. So you have to have lots of venues, and the more venues you add, the more people you add, the more variability in their skill sets, their backgrounds, their experience. So,
by the way, we should say you know all of this firsthand because you set up and founded the Mad Egg chain, which has several outlets, chicken restaurants, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's born from my own experience in there, coming from like a finance background where you're quite analytical or data driven to go into a restaurant space, which is much more intuition and empathy driven than numbers driven in terms of how you run your business.
How did you find that? Yeah, how did you find that? Because you're coming, I mean, your own background was in Accenture and Davy, and it was kind of highly professional, white collar stuff, very data driven stuff, and now you're going into the restaurant business, which you're describing now here today as being more instinct driven.
It was a bit of a shock. I had worked obviously in restaurants, but not owned one. So when your own kind of bankroll is on the line, it can be a little bit of a tough thing to swallow. Now, for me, like I loved it and still do, obviously, as a space, and I've started Nori to try and help the industry. But I think that experience is a big culture shock for me, going from something that every decision needed to have data to back it, a quantitative reasoning. You needed to really be directionally aligned with data to make any decision in Accenture or Davy or any of those businesses, to go into a restaurant where everything was experience and this is how I like to do it, or it used to be, or what I think will happen. So I think like it's just a different industry. It's just different types of people that work there, different backgrounds.
I mean, is that why so many of them go bust?
I wouldn't. I would say it doesn't help, right? If you come from a background where you don't have a high level of financial literacy or data literacy or business management experience, it can be tough to make something work, right? And then you couple that with an industry where the EBITDA or profitability levels are quite lean, right? Single digits in most people's cases, which means you really have little room for error in how slick your operations are run. Both of those compounded together conjure up a pretty difficult environment to operate a business in.
Well, then, how did you approach that? We'll come back to Nori in a second, but we're on the topic now, and we're talking about data-driven processes and looking at things analytically and quantitatively versus just, using your gut. So you opened Mad Egg, which, as anyone who lives around Dublin will know, is quite a nice chicken, casual restaurant dining place, free-range chicken, pretty nice stuff. So the food is one thing. But the data-driven bit, the analytical stuff, what was the part of that in creating and running Mad Egg?
You need to build your business off outside of product, right? Well, product also in this. You need to build your business bottom up or back into it off a P&L or a financial statement, right? Ultimately, you need to be looking at it to go, how do you get to a level of control and a level of profitability of the type of restaurant you're going to open, right? That's the approach that we took. We looked at it and said, if we go super niche onto free range fried chicken, you can have better economies of scale on product, better margins, but also you can have a better quality product to differentiate yourself from the market. And if you've got single source of protein, you can be more logistical in terms of how you deliver it in your operations, and you can then map out what that will look like from a cost point of view. Just gives you greater control all the way down through the financial and operational side of the business. Yeah. And then equally, like ultimately what restaurants need to do and what we're seeing them do in light of really tough inflationary pressures is act as like a lot of pageantry or experience out front, but a logistics business in the back end. Like think Henry Ford in the back end and a theater in the front end. And that's what will make it successful, right? You need to think about it like that. Your supply chain. I'm going to say this is a compliment, Conor. That is the coldest, most accountant-like, most analytical sounding explanation of a chicken restaurant I've ever heard in my life. And I can kind of see why the guys at Excel. So you just got funded $16 million by Excel, which is a really well-known Silicon Valley venture capital firm. How did you approach them? We were introduced by one of our other investors earlier this year, and we just started speaking, right? They had, in fairness, we approached a specific team. They had put a small investment into Nori at the very earliest stage through like a scout check, it's called, which is kind of like we'll keep tabs on this business, and we touch base every so often. One of our current investors in London, Chris, had intro to say, hey, look, these Nori are traction is going well, numbers are looking good, they're considering going out to market, they've had a couple of people approach them, which we did. So we just connected and gave them a state of play, a view on where we saw the industry going, how we think we could help, the bets we wanted to take, and the conversation evolved from there, right? They looked at it like we do, one of the biggest industries in the world, it's one of the most challenged industries in the world. So it's ripe for opportunity, right? It's pretty low on the technological advancement side as well.
And you're looking to break into and scale in the US, right? I mean, and that must be an entirely different arena particularly in the restaurant business?
Yeah, currently we operate UK, Europe, Middle East, and the US, so we're live in all of those regions today. I would say the problems that we see for operators and restaurateurs are quite similar. Obviously, different regions have different levels of cost or taxation rates and things like that. But inherently, successful restaurants are about building a system, having consistency, so consistency in guest experience and employee experience and profit margins and operations. And if you can't be consistent and systematic, you can't scale. In this current environment where inflation and cost pressures are at, you need 3 venues for every 1 venue you might have had previously in terms of profitability. So scale is really where it's at.
Is that how it works? You actually build profitability literally by having just more outlets?
You need to have a certain level of profitability, a baseline, and you need to in each venue, and that's what will work, right? Like usually what kind of creators, restaurateurs is they stretch themselves too far. 1 or 2 venues don't work and will drag them down, or they can't control the operations. So as they scale out, they'll have a couple of successful venues that have a consistent level of profitability and they're hitting their numbers, but then they can lose that control as they build out a team, right? Because everything is quite driven. So that's kind of where we come in, right? Ultimately, that we can help them make sure that every venue is hitting its maximum level of profitability that it can achieve based on the unit economics it has. And that enables them to scale with confidence that you can open more doors and not sacrifice bottom line profits.
And in doing that, and in looking to maximize profitability and in looking to, streamline or cut down costs where you can, are there some functions of restaurants that are always going to be untouchable? Like, for example, could technology or AI, let's say, could it replace a chef?
Depends on the business model. Like there's already people attempting that on the robotics side for certain or augmentation, right? So you might have, say, functional cooking in certain fast food places that have chip fryers or pizza ovens. There are people doing that. So there is that. I think like where we see the industry itself is there's not a huge level of professionalization in the operations in terms of the approach that I discussed earlier or the lens that you take to it. So there's a lot of room for improvement, even just from actually systemizing the business operations. So even a use case could be rather than trying to look to put a robot in your kitchen, really understand the throughput and demand of your kitchen teams, where they should be working, when they should be working, these kind of things. If you can have products that can analyze that and suggest that, you're going to go quite a long way further than you already are.
And one of the things that I think is going to affect the overall economics of what you're doing, and I'm sure you've looked at this in detail, given your how clearly across you are the food industry, is the health of the industry itself. I mean, in Ireland, for example, we've different metrics, but Board BF last year said that overall amount of money being spent on restaurants and eating out is up. But it's moving from a casual dining experience to more of an event dining experience, maybe birthdays and things like that. Are there just too many restaurants?
I don't know if that's the case, right? I think that we look at in Ireland, like the per capita restaurant count isn't particularly dense relative to other countries.
It seems to me like maybe in the last 10 years, maybe not the last 5, but the last 10 years, that every urban street corner I go to now has a cafe. And that seems to have really just happened in the last 10 years.
It depends, right? I think that like when we look at the city centre and use Dublin city centre, for example, like the density of population and restaurants per capita there is lower than other parts of Europe and in the US or the Middle East. And I think the cost of operating in Ireland, though, is much more significant than in other countries with much higher density of footfall and population. For example, the rental rates, price per square foot, VAT rates, price of labour. All of those things are much higher in Ireland, which makes it much more difficult to run a successful restaurant.
And the rental thing, by the way, seems a bit insane. I remember writing a piece about 6 or 7 years ago predicting that the city centre high streets would be under severe pressure And not because of anything like COVID or anything like that, but because of the changing face of retail, more people using Amazon, all that sort of stuff. And that what would fill them might be more experiential stuff like dining, restaurants, cafes, things like that. But you travel around the States, you travel around other European cities, the UK in particular, and now increasingly in Ireland, I see more and more commercial outlets on streets like Henry Street, Grafton Street, other streets that are now empty, that finding it very difficult to fill. And there has to be surely some moment coming soon when commercial rates, start to really readjust to that.
You'd hope so, right? It'll make a more competitive environment as well. What we don't want, and look, we work with some of the biggest groups in the world. We also work with a lot of independent businesses. And what you don't want is one side to be overloaded, right? That only the biggest businesses or biggest brands can afford to operate because rates and full occupancy costs are too high relative to the level of business that's there, which is definitely seems to be the case in Dublin in particular. I think that actually, when you mentioned around the industry still being in or experiencing a bit of friction or some challenges, there's still scenarios where people are paying key money for prime locations in the city centre to buy leases off people. So there's the supply in certain areas is lower than the demand. Obviously, in more regional areas, that might be different.
Just going back to your own journey here, Conor, you looked at franchising initially, I think, when you were looking to start up yourself after Accenture and Davy, but you decided to create your own brand, which is Mad Egg. Was that a daunting one? And why did you pick chicken?
Yeah, good question. I think the naivety helped, to say the least. If I'd known all the challenges I was going to face, maybe you'd thought twice. But no, I looked at franchises, both domestic and bringing some international franchises to Ireland. I'd always worked in and out of hospitality growing up. And then when I was working, I thought it could be something to scratch the entrepreneurial itch that I had, and it felt accessible and more accessible than starting something like a Nori at that time. So I looked at it, and the blocker was the lack of creative control. When I started to see their own models, and they were good business models, I just felt like that I had that understanding, and if I could create a good product and a good brand, that I could potentially have a good run at it myself or ourselves. Why we chose chicken? A few reasons. It's the most sold protein in the country, right? It's everyone's favorite protein in Ireland. Fried chicken, and particularly like these fried chicken sandwiches that we specialize on, hugely popular in the States, in Asia, even in London, didn't exist in Ireland at the time. So there's a kind of a bit of arbitrage in terms of concept there to bring it over to a market. And we felt like if we have some of the best farms and poultry farming in the country, and if we could connect with some good suppliers there, you could build a pretty compelling and high value product offering at a good price point. So they're the reasons we did it. And then obviously the aforementioned concept lends itself to running a more logistical and say profitable business as well. And so all those packaged together.
Did you pick the slogan, "Get laid, get fed"?
I did, unfortunately.
Did you write it?
Did I write it? Yeah.
It's a pretty good one.
Yeah, like it's catchy, right? So that's the main thing.
Yeah, it also creates an ambience when you go to Mad Egg, you might have certain expectations when you go there. But I must say I've never been, but maybe I'll go now. I don't know.
Yeah, I think I have good expectations to get fed, and hopefully whatever happens afterwards is up to yourself.
Well, look, Conor Sheridan, founder and CEO of Nori, thank you very much for coming on and explaining what the company does. The very best of luck with your the future, and on the back of that fantastic funding round from Accel. John Smith was on audio today, and JJ Clark produced. And I'm Adrian Weckler. You've been listening to and watching The Big Tech Show. We'll talk to you soon.